Good morning, guys. Hope everyone is doing well. I am currently recording this from my car in Reno because my dog Bananas had to have a procedure done, and so the only place I could do it was a specialty clinic here in Reno. So here I sit outside the vet office and figured I'd get this done now. So I hope everyone is doing well and hanging in there. If there's anything you guys need, any questions you have, whatever, just shoot me an email or get in touch with me on Teams. Um, I'm here to help. I'm here to provide whatever resources I can for you guys. And I just want to make sure that you're all okay and that you're doing as well as you can in these really, really uncertain, weird, and stressful times. We're going to move on to chapter 2 today of the book of Mice and Men. Once again, I'll be reading and stopping occasionally to talk about some stuff coming up in the book. Go ahead and click on that link to genius.com's chapter 2 of Mice and Men. And once again, I really like that website because you can click on any of the gray shaded areas, and then on the right hand side of your screen, information and analysis will pop up to kind of help you make sense of this book. So one thing that does come up in chapter 2, which you should be aware of, is the N-word. And this is used by characters to describe a black character in the book. This is not like John Steinbeck's way of being racist. This is John Steinbeck's way of letting his audience know that this is how people talked back then. This is a word that was thrown around very casually and normally, unfortunately, and in a much different context than it's used, in kind of popular culture, music, movies, that kind of thing, than it is today. Right now, you hear that word used in two different contexts. One is the very racist context. You don't hear it as much as we used to in this country in that context, which is great. But what we are doing is we are hearing that word used more in a popular culture sense, music, movies, TV shows, that kind of thing, as a kind of an appropriation of the word in order to take away its meaning. I think you'll find that people of my generation and older are very sensitive to that word, as opposed to the people in your generation who are perhaps using it more in that terms of appropriation and in terms of trying to make that word less powerful than it has been in the past. But just understand that it's the 1930s in America. That word was used only as a racist, derogatory word, and it was used a lot, all the time, out in the open. Nobody cared, right? So just giving you an indication of the difficult times, the messed up times that this country has gone through in terms of race and still does go through. Okay, so let's get started. Chapter 2. Like I said, I'll be stopping every now and then. Here we go. Chapter 2. The bunkhouse was a long rectangular building. Inside, the walls were whitewashed and the floor unpainted. In 3 walls there were small square windows, and in the 4th a solid door with a wooden latch. Against the walls were 8 bunks, 5 of them made up with blankets and the other 3 showing their burlap ticking. Over each bunk there was nailed an apple box with the opening forward so that it made 2 shelves for the personal belongings of the occupant of the bunk. And these shelves were loaded with little articles, soap and talcum powder, razors, and those Western magazines ranch men love to read and scoff at and secretly believe. And there were medicines on the shelves, and little vials, combs, and from nails on the box sides, a few neckties. Near one wall there was a black cast-iron stove, its stovepipe going straight up through the ceiling. In the middle of the room stood a big square table littered with playing cards, and around it were grouped boxes for the players to sit on. This description is important to note for a couple of reasons. One, it's in stark contrast to the way that Chapter 1 started. Chapter 1 started with this paradise-like description of nature untouched by humanity. Chapter 2 starts off with this description of a bunkhouse where all these ranch workers live and sleep in close proximity to one another, and it's very bland, The description is bland, right? It's not very romanticized at all. And that's meant to remind you that what humanity creates is not always wonderful. This description, I love it because it reminds me of the bunkhouse that I used to live in. When I was in college in the summers, I used to drive big rig tomato trucks. So big rig trucks that would transport tomatoes from the fields in central California to the processing plants. So places like Los Banos and as far north as Sacramento, as far south as Bakersfield, just all up and down Interstate 5. I drive all day, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was rough work, but it made me appreciate the agricultural support California gives to the rest of the world, and also gave me that feeling of camaraderie with my fellow truckers that these ranch workers feel, right? They're all living in tight quarters. In fact, it's kind of disgusting the way that we used to live. I was on a team of 3, and 2 truckers would be driving at any given time, and the 3rd trucker would then be sleeping in the bunkhouse. We had to share that same bunk with each other. Not at the same time, but whoever was off shift slept in the bunkhouse. And then one driver would get off, and then the driver who was sleeping would wake up and then get in the truck. And it's just gross. Not ideal living. It also made me appreciate not being a truck driver anymore. Anyway, back to it. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun threw a bright, dust-laden bar through one of the side windows, and in and out of the beam flies shot like rushing stars. The wooden latch raised. The door opened, and a tall, stoop-shouldered old man came in. He was dressed in blue jeans, and he carried a big push broom in his left hand. Behind him came George, and behind George, Lenny. As always, behind George, Lenny. "The boss was expecting you last night," the old man said. "He was sore as hell when you wasn't here to go out this morning." He pointed with his right arm, and out of the sleeve came a round stick-like wrist, but no hand. "You can have them 2 beds there," he said, indicating 2 bunks near the stove. So, important description of this old guy who seems to be the caretaker of the ranch house and the bunkhouse is that he's missing an arm. Or missing a hand, rather. George stepped over and threw his blankets down on the burlap sack of straw that was a mattress. He looked into his box shelf and then picked a small yellow can from it. "Say, what the hell's this?" "I don't know," said the old man. "Says, positively kills lice, roaches, and other scourges. What the hell kind of bed you giving us, anyways? We don't want no pants rabbits." So basically, bed bugs. Gross. The old swamper shifted his broom and held it between his elbow and his side while he held out his hand for the can. He studied the label carefully. "Tell you what," he said finally. "Last guy that had this bed was a blacksmith. Hell of a nice fella and a clean guy as you want to meet. Used to wash his hands even after he ate." "Then how come he got graybacks?" George was working up a slow anger. Lenny put his bindle on the neighboring bunk and sat down. He watched George with open mouth. "Tell you what," said the old swamper. "This here blacksmith, name of Whitey, was the kind of guy that would put that stuff around even if it wasn't no bugs, just to make sure, see? Tell you what he used to do. At meals, he'd peel his boiled potatoes, and he'd take out every little spot, no matter what kind, before he'd eat it. And if there was a red splotch on an egg, he'd scrape it off. Finally quit about the food. That's the kind of guy he was. Clean. Used to dress up Sundays even when he wasn't going no place. Put on a necktie even, and then sit in the bunkhouse." "I ain't so sure," said George skeptically. "What did you say he quit for?" The old man put the yellow can in his pocket, and he rubbed his bristly white whiskers with his knuckles. "Why, he just quit, the way a guy will. Says it was the food. Just wanted to move. Didn't give no other reason but the food. Just says, 'Give me my time,' one night. Anyway, the way any guy would." George lifted his tick and looked underneath it. He leaned over and inspected the sacking closely. Immediately, Lenny got up and did the same thing with his bed. Finally, George seemed satisfied. He rolled his bindle and put things on the shelf, his razor and bar of soap, his comb and bottle of pills, his liniment and leather wristband. Liniment is it's liniment oil. It's an oil that people used to buy hoping that it would cure any kind of ailment that someone would have, whether that was a bruise or a cut or any kind of common cold, right? So, not the most medically advanced society in the 1930s, and certainly not the most medically advanced people living and working in ranches. Then he made his bed up neatly with blankets. The old man said, "I guess the boss will be out here in a minute. He was sure burned when you wasn't here this morning. Come right in when he was eating breakfast and says, 'Where the hell's them new men?' and gave the stable buck hell, too." George patted a wrinkle out of his bed and sat down. "Give the stable buck hell?" The stable buck is someone who runs the stables, the horse stables. Sure. You see, the stable buck's a nigger. Nigger, huh? Yeah, nice fella, too. Got a crooked back where a horse kicked him. The boss gives him hell when he's mad, but the stable buck don't give a damn about that. He reads a lot. Got books in his room. Okay, so now we are introduced to the fourth character, right? We've got George and Lenny, the first two characters we were introduced to. Now we've got this old man who seems to take care of stuff around the bunkhouse. And then we've got this stable buck. Notice how the next two characters we've met, the old man and the stable buck, are both physically missing something, right? The old man is missing a hand, and the stable buck was kicked by a horse, and his back is all crooked, right? So they're both suffering physically. It's important to remember that. What kind of guy is the boss? George asked. Well, he's a pretty nice fella. Gets pretty mad sometimes, but he's pretty nice. Tell you what, know what he done Christmas? Bring a gallon of whiskey right in here and says, "Drink hearty, boys, Christmas comes up once a year." The hell he did, whole gallon? Yes, sir, Jesus. We had fun. They let the nigger come in that night. Little Skinner name of Smitty took after the nigger. Done pretty good, too. The guys wouldn't let him use his feet, so the nigger got him. If he could have used his feet, Smitty says he would have killed the nigger. The guy said on account of the nigger's got a crooked back, Smitty can't use his feet. He paused in relish of the memory. After that, the guys went into Soul Dad and raised hell. I didn't go in there. I ain't got the poop no more. When someone says, I don't have the poop anymore, I don't got the poop no more, they're not talking about bowel movements. They're not talking about excrement. When someone from the 1930s says this, I ain't got the poop no more, it means I just don't have the energy, right? I don't have it in me anymore. So when all the ranch workers went into town to the bars and went crazy, the old man stayed behind because I ain't got the poop no more. Lenny was just finishing making his bed. The wooden latch raised again and the door opened. A little stocky man stood in the open doorway. He wore blue jean trousers, a flannel shirt, a black unbuttoned vest, and a black coat. His thumbs were stuck in his belt, on each side of a square steel buckle. On his head was a soiled brown Stetson hat, and he wore high-heeled boots and spurs to prove he was not a laboring man. So notice the description of this guy, wearing a lot of black. And as you can remember from our discussions previously, the color black associated with not great stuff. Okay. He wore all this outfit, right? The Stetson hat, which is like a big cowboy hat, and all this fine looking black clothing to ensure that no one would mistake him for someone who worked for a living. So this is clearly not one of the workers who walks in. The old swamper looked quickly at him and then shuffled to the door, rubbing his whiskers with his knuckles as he went. Them guys just come, he said, and shuffled past the boss and out the door. The boss stepped into the room with the short, quick steps of a fat-legged man. I wrote Murray and Reddy I wanted 2 men this morning. You got your work slips? George reached into his pocket and produced the slips and handed them to the boss. It wasn't Murray and Reddy's fault. It says right here on the slip that you was to be here for work this morning. George looked down at his feet. The bus driver gave us a bump steer, he said. We had to walk 10 miles. Says we was here when we wasn't. We couldn't get no rides in the morning. The boss squinted his eyes. Well, I had to send out the grain teams 2 buckers. Won't do any good to go out now till after dinner. He pulled his time book out of his pocket and opened it where a pencil was stuck between the leaves. George scowled meaningfully at Lenny, and Lenny nodded to show that he understood. The boss licked his pencil. What's your name? George Milton. What's yours? George said. His name's Lenny Small. The names were entered into the book. Let's see. This is the 20th, noon the 20th. Close the book. Where you boys been working? Notice Lenny's last name. Lenny Small. Lenny is anything but small. In stature. Physically, he's gigantic. So it's an ironic name. Mentally, he's quite tiny. So an appropriate name mentally. Up around weed, said George. You too? To Lenny. Yeah, him too, said George. The boss pointed a playful finger at Lenny. He ain't much of a talker, is he? No, he ain't, but he's sure as hell of a good worker. Strong as a bull. Lenny smiled to himself. Strong as a bull, he repeated. George scowled at him. Lenny dropped his head in shame at having forgotten. The boss said suddenly, Listen, Small. Lenny raised his head. What can you do? In a panic, Lenny looked at George for help. He can do anything you tell him, said George. He's a good skinner. He can wrestle grain bags, drive a cultivator. He can do anything. Just give him a try. The boss turned on George. Well, why don't you let him answer? What you trying to put over? George broke in loudly. Oh, I ain't saying he's bright. He ain't. But I say he's a goddamn good worker. He can put up 400-pound bail. The boss deliberately put the little book in his pocket. He hooked his thumbs in his belt and squinted one eye nearly closed. Say, what you selling? Huh? I said, What stake you got in this guy? You taking his pay away from him? No, of course I ain't. Why do you think I'm selling him out? Well, I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. I'd just like to know what your interest is. George said, he's my cousin. I told his old lady I'd take care of him. He got kicked in the head by a horse when he was a kid. He's all right. Just ain't bright. But he can do anything you tell him. The boss turned half away. Well, God knows he don't need any brains to buck barley bags. But don't you try putting nothing over, Milton. I got my eye on you. Why'd you quit and weed? Job was done, said George promptly. What kind of job? We was digging a cesspool. All right, but don't try to put nothing over, because you can't get away with nothing. I seen wise guys before. Go on out with the grain teams after dinner. They're picking up barley at the threshing machine. Go out with Slim's team. Slim? Yeah, big tall Skinner. You'll see him at dinner. He turned abruptly and went to the door. But before he went out, he turned and looked for a long moment at the two men. When the sound of his footsteps had died away, George turned on Lenny. So you wasn't going to say a word. You was going to leave your big flapper shut and let me do the talking. Damn near lost us a job. Lenny stared hopelessly at his hands. I forgot, George. Yeah, you forgot. You always forget. I got to talk you out of it. He sat down heavily on the bunk. Now he's got his eye on us. Now we got to be careful and not make no slips. You keep your big flapper shut after this. He fell morosely silent. George, what do you want now? I wasn't kicked in the head with no horse, was I, George? Be a damn good thing if you was, George said viciously. Save everybody a hell of a lot of trouble. You said I was your cousin, George. Well, that was a lie, and I'm damn glad it was. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself. He stopped suddenly, stepped to the open front door, and peered out. Say, what the hell are you doing listening? The old man came slowly into the room. Okay, before we move on, a couple of things. One, you can see that George and Lenny's relationship is rare in this world. Because, as is evidenced by the fact that the boss of the ranch immediately wanted to know, like, what are you guys doing together, right? Why are you talking for him, pointing at George and saying, why are you talking for Lenny? And what's your problem? Why are you hooked up with this guy, Lenny? You're not taking advantage of him, stuff like that. So, indicates that this is a very rare relationship in this very lonesome, isolated, difficult life. Second thing I wanted to stop and reveal was that George will lie for Lenny, right? Just to make sure that they're okay, that they can be employed, right? So George says he was hit in the head by a horse, which isn't true. George says he's his cousin. That's not true, right? And George is really mean to Lenny, right? Says, like, if I was related to you, I'd shoot myself. And yet, what George says and what George does reveal two different people, right? George is really mean to Lenny, but at the same time, George takes care of Lenny. So obviously there's affection. Obviously there's something good in George. Okay, then they notice that the old man's been listening. The old man came slowly into the room. He had his broom in his hand, and at his heels there walked a drag-footed sheepdog, gray of muzzle, and with pale, blind old eyes. The dog struggled lamely to the side of the room and lay down, grunting softly to himself and licking his grizzled, moth-eaten coat. The swamper watched him until he was settled. I wasn't listening. I was just standing in the shade a minute, scratching my dog. I just now finished swamping out the wash house. Notice the description of the old man's dog basically might as well be a description of him, right? Just old, physically weak and hurt, full of fleas, right? Just not the most appealing description of a dog or a person. You was poking your big ears into our business, George said. I don't like nobody to get nosy. The old man looked uneasily from George to Lenny, then back. I just come there, he said. I didn't hear nothing you guys was saying. I ain't interested in nothing you was saying. Guy in a ranch don't never listen nor he ask no questions. Damn right he don't, said George, slightly mollified. Not if he wants to stay working long. Mollified. Look it up. But he was reassured by the swamper's defense. Come on in and sit down a minute, he said. It's a hell of an old dog. Yeah, I had him ever since he was a pup. God, he was a good sheepdog when he was younger. He stood his broom against the wall and he rubbed his white bristled cheek with his knuckles. How'd you like the boss? He asked. Pretty good. Seemed all right. He's a nice fella, the swamper agreed. You got to take him right. At that moment, a young man came into the bunkhouse, a thin young man with a brown face, with brown eyes and a head of slightly curled hair. He wore a work glove on his left hand, and like the boss, he wore high-heeled boots. Seen my old man? He asked. The swamper said. He was just here a minute ago, Curly. Went over to the cookhouse, I think. I'll try to catch him, said Curly. His eyes passed over the new men and he stopped. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. Sorry. Technical malfunction. Should still be working. All right. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. His arms gradually bent at the elbows and his hands closed into fists. He stiffened and went into a slight crouch. His glance was at once calculating and pugnacious. Pugnacious! Look it up! Lenny squirmed under the look and shifted his feet nervously. Curly stepped gingerly close to him. You the new guys the old man was waiting for? We just come in, said George. Let the big guy talk. Lenny twisted with embarrassment. George said, suppose he don't want to talk. Curly lashed his body around. By Christ, he's got to talk when he's spoke to. What the hell are you getting in it for? We travel together, said George coldly. Oh, so it's that way. George was tense and motionless. Yeah, it's that way. Lenny was looking helplessly to George for instruction. You won't let the big guy talk, is that it? You can talk if he wants to tell you anything. He nodded slightly to Lenny. We just come in, said Lenny softly. Curly stared levelly at him. Well, next time you answer when you're spoke to. He turned toward the door and walked out, and his elbows were still bent out a little. Okay, so this description of Curly now. The boss's son. So, once again, I want you to go back and read the description of Curly. So let's do it. That paragraph where he comes in, he talks to the old man, and then he notices the two guys. And as soon as he notices the two guys, listen to how he's described. His eyes passed over the new men and he stopped. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. His arms gradually bent at the elbows and his hands closed into fists. He stiffened and went to a slight crouch. Okay, so first of all, he's described as very animalistic, right? Crouch, hands into fists, arms bent at the elbow. But he's also being described as a fighter, right? Now, what kind of person walks into a room, sees two people he's never met before, and the first reaction is, right, insecure, violent tendencies, right? Let's keep an eye on this kid, Curly, the boss's son. Also, oddly wears one glove. That's it. Not on the other hand, just one glove on one hand. So we got to watch out to see what that's for as well. All right. George watched him out, and then he turned back to the swamper. Say, what the hell he's got on his shoulder? Well, he didn't do nothing to him. The old man looked cautiously at the door to make sure no one was listening. That's the boss's son, he said quietly. Curly's pretty handy. He done quite a bit in the ring. He's a lightweight, and he's handy. Well, let him be handy, said George. You don't have to take after Lenny. Lenny didn't do nothing to him. What's he got against Lenny? So we learned that Curly used to be a boxer, so indicating perhaps why his first reaction to seeing anybody is to get in the fighter's crouch. The swamper considered. Well, tell you what. Curly's like a lot of little guys. He hates big guys. He's all the time picking scraps with big guys. Kind of like he's mad at them because he ain't a big guy. You've seen little guys like that, ain't you? Always scrappy. So now we also know that Curly's not the biggest person in the world, especially in comparison to Lenny. Sure, said George. I've seen plenty tough little guys. But this Curly better not make no mistakes about Lenny. Lenny ain't handy, but this Curly punk is going to get hurt if he messes around with Lenny. Well, Curly's pretty handy, the swamper said skeptically. Never did seem right to me. Suppose Curly jumps a big guy and licks him. Everybody says what a game guy Curly is. Suppose he does the same thing and gets licked. Then everybody says the big guy ought to pick on somebody his own size. And maybe they gang up on the big guy. Never did seem right to me. Seems like Curly ain't giving nobody a chance. So the old man makes a great observation. He says, little guys like Curly love to pick fights with big guys. Because no matter what, they're going to come out on top. So if a little guy picks a fight with a big guy and the little guy wins, people are going to say, oh, wow, that little guy's tough. What a good fighter. If the little guy picks a fight with a big guy and the big guy wins, everyone's going to say, hey, big guy, why don't you pick on someone your own size? Right? So it's a win-win situation. That's the kind of guy this Curly is. George was watching the door. He said ominously, well, you better watch out for Lenny. Lenny ain't no fighter, but Lenny's strong and quick, and Lenny don't know rules. He walked to the square table and sat down on one of the boxes. He gathered some of the cards together and shuffled them. The old man sat down on another box. Don't tell Curly I said none of this. He'd slough me. He just don't give a damn. We'll never get canned because his old man's the boss. George cut the cards and began turning them over, looking at each one and throwing it down on a pile. He said, this guy Curly sounds like a son of a bitch to me. I don't like mean little guys. Seems to me like he's worse lately, said the swamper. He got married a couple of weeks ago. Wife lives over in the boss's house. Seems like Curly is cockier than ever since he got married. George grunted. Maybe he's showing off for his wife. The swamper warmed to this gossip. You seen that glove on his left hand? Yeah, I seen it. Well, that glove's full of Vaseline. Vaseline? What the hell for? Well, I'll tell you what. Curly says he's keeping that hand soft for his wife. George studied the cards absorbedly. That's a dirty thing to tell around, he said. The old man was reassured. He had drawn a derogatory statement from George. He felt safe now, and he spoke more confidently. Wait till you see Curly's wife. George cut the cards again and put out a solitary lay, slowly and deliberately. Purdy? He asked casually. Yeah, Purdy. But George studied his cards. But what? Well, she got the eye. Yeah? Married 2 weeks and got the eye? Maybe that's why Curly's pants is full of ants. I seen her give Slim the eye. Slim's a jerk-line skinner. He's a hell of a nice fella. Slim don't need to wear no high-heeled boots on a grain team. I seen her give Slim the eye. Curly never seen it, and I seen her give Carlson the eye. George pretended a lack of interest. Looks like we was gonna have fun. Okay, so Curly, small guy, insecure, violent tendencies, ex-boxer. He's the boss's son, so you know he's going to act entitled and he's going to act better than everybody else. Just got married to someone who, according to the old man, has the eye. What's the eye? The wandering eye, right? Maybe even though she's married, taking a look around the room and seeing who else might be out there. So a lot of trouble brewing, right? Maybe you can start putting the pieces together as to what might happen with all these characters, right? It seems like it's a dangerous mix of ingredients right now. All these guys who are socially awkward to be putting it best, but probably like socially deviant, right? You've got power dynamic with the boss's son, and all the other workers. Plus, you've got a wife of the boss's son who seems to have the wandering eye and looking around the room. Not a good mix, especially when someone like Lenny comes into the picture, right, doesn't know what's going on, right? Mentally not all there. He's not going to understand any of these romantic dynamics or anything like that. And he's really strong and powerful and doesn't know his own strength. So you can already start seeing that this is not going to be a good situation for anybody. All right. George pretended a lack of interest. Looks like he's going to have some fun. The swamper stood up from his box. Know what I think? George did not answer. Well, I think Curly's married a tart. He ain't the first, said George. There's plenty done that. For those of you who don't know, a tart is a word that was used to describe women who were promiscuous or flirtatious, stuff like that. The old man moved toward the door, and his ancient dog lifted his head and peered about, and then got painfully to his feet to follow. I gotta be setting out the wash basins for the guys. The teams will be in before long. You guys gonna buck barley? Yeah. You won't tell Curly nothing I said. Hell no. Well, you look her over, mister. You see if she ain't a tart. He stepped out the door and into the brilliant sunshine. George laid down his cards thoughtfully, turned his piles of 3. He built 4 clubs on his ace pile. The sun square was on the floor now, and the flies whipped through it like sparks. A sound of jingling harness and the croak of heavy-laden axles sounded from outside. From the distance came a clear call. Stablebuck! Ooh, Stablebuck! And then, where the hell is that goddamn nigger? George stared at his solitaire lay. So he's playing solitaire, the card game. And then he flounced the cards together and turned around to Lenny. Lenny was lying down on the bunk watching him. Look, Lenny, this here ain't no setup. I'm scared. You're going to have trouble with that guy Curly. I seen that kind before. He was kind of feeling you out. He figures he's got you scared and he's going to take a sock at you the first chance he gets. Lenny's eyes were frightened. I don't want no trouble, he said plaintively. Don't let him sock me, George. George got up and went over to Lenny's bunk and sat down on it. I hate that kind of bastard, he said. I seen plenty of them. Like the old guy says, Curly don't take no chances. He always wins. He thought for a moment. If he tangles with you, Lenny, we're going to get the can. Don't make no mistake about that. He's the boss's son. Look, Lenny, you try to keep away from him, will you? Don't ever speak to him. If he comes in here, you move clear to the other side of the room. Will you do that, Lenny? I don't want no trouble, Lenny mourned. I never done nothing to him. Well, that won't do you no good if Curly wants to plug himself up for a fighter. Just don't have nothing to do with him. Will you remember? Sure, George. I ain't going to say a word. The sound of the approaching grain teams was louder. Thud of big hooves on the ground. drag of brakes and the jingle of trace chains. Men were calling back and forth from the teams. These teams of workers, teams of guys bucking barley, baling hay, just working the ranch. George, sitting on the bunk beside Lenny, frowned as he thought. Lenny asked timidly, "You ain't mad, George?" "I ain't mad at you. I'm mad at this here Curly bastard. I hope he's going to get a little stake together. Maybe $100. His tone grew decisive. "You keep away from Curly, Lenny." "Well, sure I will, George. I won't say a word. Don't let him pull you in, but if the son of a bitch socks you, let him have it." "Let him have what, George?" Never mind. I'll tell you when. I hate that kind of guy. Look, Lenny, if you get in any kind of trouble, you remember what I told you to do?" Lenny raised up on his elbow. His face contorted with thought. Then his eyes moved sadly to George's face. "If I get in any trouble, you ain't going to let me tend the rabbits." "That's not what I meant. Do you remember where we slept last night, down by the river?" "Yeah, I remember. Oh, sure I remember. I go there and hide in the brush." "Hide till I come for you. Don't let nobody see you. Hide in the brush by the river. Say that over. Hide in the brush by the river. Down in the brush by the river. If you get in trouble. If I get in trouble." All right, we're getting smacked in the face with all this foreshadowing, right? We've got an explosive social situation between George and Curly and Lenny and all the other guys on the teams and the boss and the boss's son's wife. And then you've got Lenny, who's has a history of inadvertently making trouble for himself and George. Big guy who doesn't know his own strength. And then you've got George telling him, "Look, Lenny, this guy Curly, he's already got it out for you. If anything happens, if you get into trouble for whatever reason, remember what I told you to do." Right? It's like, it couldn't be more obvious. There's going to be trouble. Right? Lenny's going to get into trouble. Poor guy. Where did I leave off? A brake screeched outside. A call came. "Stable, Buck!" "Oh, stable, Buck!" George said. "Say it over to yourself, Lenny, so you won't forget it." Both men glanced up, for the rectangle of sunshine on the doorway was cut off. A girl was standing there, looking in. She had full, rouged lips and wide-spaced eyes, heavily made up. So this must be Curly's wife. Rouge, it's a shade of red, right? So she's got on the lipstick, makeup on the face. Her fingernails were red. Her hair hung in little rolled clusters, like sausages. It's kind of a weird description of someone's hair, like sausages. But I think what Steinbeck means is tightly rolled curls, right? So you can imagine someone with hair and tightly rolled curls coming down. She wore a cotton house dress and red mules, on the insteps of which were little bouquets of red ostrich feathers. "I'm looking for Curly," she said. Her voice was a nasal, brittle quality. George looked away from her and then back. "He was here a minute ago, but he went." "Oh." She put her hands behind her back and leaned against the doorframe so that her body was thrown forward. "You're the new fellas that just come, ain't you?" "Yeah." Lenny's eyes moved down over her body, and though she did not seem to be looking at Lenny, she brindled a little. She looked at her fingernails. "Sometimes Curly's in here," she explained. George said brusquely, "Well, he ain't now." "If he ain't, I guess I better look someplace else," she said playfully. Lenny watched her fascinated. George said, "If I see him, I'll pass the word you was looking for him." She smiled archly and twitched her body. "Nobody can't blame a person for looking," she said. There were footsteps behind her going by. She turned her head. "Hi, Slim," she said. Slim's voice came through the door. "Hi, good looking. I'm trying to find Curly, Slim." "Well, you ain't trying very hard. I seen him going in your house." She was suddenly apprehensive. "Bye, boys," she called into the bunkhouse, and she hurried away. George looked around at Lenny. "Jesus, what a tramp," he said. "So that's what Curly picks for a wife." "She's purty," said Lenny defensively. "Yeah, and she's sure hiding it. Curly got his work ahead of him. Bet she'd clear out for $20. Basically saying, I bet she'd leave him for something as little as $20. Lenny still stared at the doorway where she had been. Gosh, she was purty. He smiled admiringly. George looked quickly down at him, and then he took him by the ear and shook him. "Listen to me, you crazy bastard," he said fiercely. "Don't you even take a look at that bitch. I don't care what she says and what she does. I seen him poison before, but I never seen no piece of jailbait worse than her. You leave her be." Lenny tried to disengage his ear. "I never done nothing, George." "No, you never. But when she was standing in the doorway showing her legs, you wasn't looking the other way neither." "I never meant no harm, George. Honest, I never." "Well, you keep away from her, 'cause she's a rat trap if I ever seen one. You let Curly take the rap. He'd let himself in for it." "Club full of Vaseline," George said disgustedly. And I bet he's eating raw eggs and right into the patent medicine houses. Lenny cried out suddenly. I don't like this place, George. This ain't no good place. I want to get out of here. Yeah, good call, Lenny. Good instincts. You probably should follow them. We got to keep it till we get a steak. We can't help it, Lenny. We'll get out just as soon as we can. I don't like it no better than you do. So George is basically saying, look, I don't like it either, but we got to finish the job to get some money, right? Get that steak. Not steak food, but steak like money. He went back to the table and set out a new solitaire hand. No, I don't like it, he said. 2 bits, I'd shove out of here. If we could just get a few dollars in the poke, we'll shove off and go up the American River and pan gold. We can maybe make a couple of dollars a day there, and we might hit a pocket. Lenny leaned eagerly toward him. Let's go, George. Let's get out of here. It's mean here. We gotta stay, said George shortly. Shut up now. The guys will be coming in. From the washroom nearby came the sound of running water and rattling basins. George studied the cards. Maybe we ought to wash up, he said. But we ain't done nothing to get dirty. A tall man stood in the doorway. He held a crushed Stetson hat under his arm while he combed his long, black, damp hair straight back. Like the others, he wore blue jeans and a short denim jacket. When he had finished combing his hair, he moved into the room, and he moved with a majesty only achieved by royalty and master craftsmen. He was a jerk-line skinner, the prince of the ranch, capable of driving 10, 16, even 20 mules with a single line to the leaders. He was capable of killing a fly on the wheeler's butt with a bullwhip without touching the mule. There was a gravity in his manner, and a quiet so profound that all talk stopped when he spoke. His authority was so great that his word was taken on any subject, be it politics or love. This was Slim, the jerk-line skinner. His hatchet face was ageless. He might have been 35 or 50. His ear heard more than was said to him, and his slow speech had overtones not of thought, but of understanding beyond thought. His hands, large and lean, were as delicate in their action as those of a temple dancer. He smoothed out his crushed hat, creased it in the middle, and put it on. He looked kindly at the 2 in the bunkhouse. It's brighter than a bitch outside, he said gently. Can't hardly see nothing in here. You the new guys? Okay, so here we're introduced to another character, Slim, the prince of the ranch. That doesn't mean he's like the son of a king or something like that. Basically, that description of him means that everybody respects him, right? Because he's really smart, he works really hard, he's really skilled, and he's very wise, right? He walks in the door, and everyone stops talking. He hears more than what's said. I love that description of somebody. All right, he hears what's going on more than what's said, meaning he can read a room. Excuse me. I hope it's not the COVID. He walks into a room, and he can read it, right? He's a really wise person. He's a born leader. Everyone listens to him. He's very skilled, right? He's described as being able to take a whip and kill a bug on a mule's butt without even touching the mule. And this is Slim, right? He's going to be a character who we look to for guidance, who George and Lenny look to for guidance. And also, unfortunately, has the eye of Curly's wife. Just come, said George. Can I buck barley? That's what the boss says. Slim sat down on a box across the table from George. He studied the solitaire hand that was upside down to him. Hope you get on my team, he said. His voice was very gentle. I got a pair of punks on my team that don't know a barley bag from a blue ball. You guys ever bucked any barley? Hell yeah, said George. I ain't nothing to scream about, but that big bastard there could put up more grain alone than most pears can. Lenny, who had been following the conversation back and forth with his eyes, smiled complacently at the compliment. Slim looked approvingly at George for having given the compliment. He leaned over the table and snapped the corner of a loose card. You guys travel around together? His tone was friendly. It invited confidence without demanding it. Sure, said George. We kind of look after each other. He indicated Lenny with his thumb. He ain't bright. Hell of a good worker, though. Hell of a nice fella, but he ain't bright. I've known him for a long time. Slim looked through George and beyond him. Ain't many guys travel around together, he mused. I don't know why. Everybody in the whole damn world is scared of each other. Sounds a lot like now. It's a lot nicer to go around with a guy you know, said George. A powerful, big-stomached man came into the bunkhouse. His head still dripped water from the scrubbing and dousing. Hi, Slim, he said. Then he stopped and stared at George and Lenny. These guys just come, said Slim by way of introduction. Glad to meet you, the big man said. My name's Carlson. I'm George Milton. This here's Lenny Small. Glad to meet you, Carlson said again. He ain't very small. He chuckled softly at his joke. Ain't small at all, he repeated. Meant to ask you, Slim. How's your bitch? I seen she wasn't under your wagon this morning. She slang her pups last night, said Slim. 9 of them. I drowned 4 of them right off. She couldn't feed that many. All right, a couple of things. I know everyone probably had a good laugh, good snicker at me using the word bitch, but it was in reference to a female dog that Slim owns. Second, you might have missed a really horrifying detail. Carlson comes in and asks, "How's your dog?" Slim says, "She had puppies last night. I had to drown 4 of them." Why would someone drown puppies? It's not because Slim is mean. It's not because Slim is masochistic. It's not because Slim enjoys hurting animals. It's because, like he says, the mom wouldn't be able to feed all of them, right? So if the mom is not able to feed all of her puppies, what's going to happen? Eventually, over time, they'll starve. So what Slim has done is essentially, it's something that's hard for a lot of readers of this book to accept. But what Slim has done is basically a mercy killing. Killed 4 puppies so that the remaining 5 had a chance to survive, right? Knowing that the mom couldn't feed them all, so they were all going to starve. Slim just chose 4 random puppies to kill in an effort to save the other 5. It's a mercy killing, right? Saves them from suffering, gives them a quick death right off the bat. It's harsh, and it's difficult to imagine, and it's difficult to put yourself in Slim's shoes and being able to do the same thing, but that's the point, right? This is a very, very difficult time for these guys, right? It's a cutthroat world out there that if you don't work, you don't eat. You don't eat, you die. And there's not a lot of work out there. That's why George, knowing that this is a bad situation for them, still is adamant about them staying because they need the work. They need the money, right? As difficult as this situation might be, as much as Lenny doesn't like it, as much trouble as Lenny might get into, they need the work, right? It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. And so this is going to end up being a very symbolic moment in the book. It's a quick moment. You miss it if you're not careful, but it's heavily symbolic. So remember this for the rest of the book as a symbolic moment. Slim kills 4 puppies in an effort to do 2 things. Save the others and to end the suffering, because they're just going to have a miserable life of starving. So he just ends the suffering. It's hard. It's hard to accept. It's difficult to read. It's difficult to think about. But Slim has reasons to do it. And they're reasons that are noble. It's like I said, he's not mean. He doesn't do it because he wants to. He does it because he feels like that's the best thing for the puppies. As terrible as it is, it's the best thing for them. Okay. Got 5 left, huh? Yeah, 5. I kept the biggest. What kind of dogs do you think they're going to be? I don't know, said Slim. Some kind of shepherds, I guess. It's the most kind I've seen around when she was in the heat. Carlson went on. Got 5 pups, huh? Gonna keep all of them? I don't know. Have to keep them a while so they can drink Lulu's milk. Carlson said thoughtfully, well, look at here, Slim. I've been thinking. That dog of Candy's is so goddamn old he can't hardly walk. Stinks like hell, too. Every time he comes into the bunkhouse, I can smell him for 2-3 days. Why don't you get Candy to shoot his old dog and give him one of those pups to raise up? I can smell that dog a mile away. Got no teeth, damn near blind, can't eat. Candy feeds him milk. Can't chew nothing else. So a couple things. We find out that, A, the old man's name is Candy. And B, this idea of a mercy killing comes up again, right? Referring to Candy's old dog. And we do this for pets too, right? Make no mistake. We do the same things. When our pets become old, we have to make decisions sometimes. Is their life so miserable that it's worth living anymore, right? Candy's dog doesn't have teeth, can't see, can barely walk, right? What kind of life is that? And so Carlson's suggesting that Candy should just put that dog down, put it out of its misery. We have to do that sometimes with our pets too, right? So as difficult, as horrifying as these descriptions of what these guys do to their dogs is, you have to understand you can relate in some way if you've ever had a pet that you've had to put to sleep. Sometimes their lives just become so difficult that you're doing them a favor by letting them go. George had been staring intently at Slim. Suddenly a triangle began to ring outside, slowly at first, and then faster and faster until the beat of it disappeared into one ringing sound. It stopped as suddenly as it had started. There she goes, said Carlson. Outside, there was a burst of voices as a group of men went by. Slim stood up slowly and with dignity. Notice the descriptions of Slim again, with dignity, right? So this guy is definitely different from all these other workers. You guys better come on while there's still something to eat. There'll be nothing left in a couple of minutes. Carlson stepped back to let Slim precede him. Then the two of them went out the door. Lenny was watching George excitedly. George rumpled his cards into a messy pile. Yeah, George said. I heard him, Lenny. I'll ask him. A brown and a white one, Lenny cried excitedly. Come on, let's get dinner. I don't know whether he got a brown and white one. Lenny wants a dog. Right? Pretty cute. Lenny didn't move from his bunk. You ask him right away, George, so he won't kill no more of them. Sure, come on now, get up on your feet. Lenny rolled off his bunk and stood up, and the two of them started for the door. Just as they reached it, Curly bounced in. You seen a girl around here? He demanded angrily. George said coldly. About a half an hour ago, maybe. Well, what the hell was she doing? George stood still, watching the angry little man. He said insultingly, She said she was looking for you. Curly seemed really to see George for the first time. His eyes flashed over George, took in his height, measured his reach, looked at his trim middle. Well, which way did she go? He demanded at last. I don't know, said George. I didn't watch her go. Curly scowled at him and, turning, hurried out the door. George said, You know, Lenny, I'm scared I'm going to tangle with that bastard myself. I hate his guts. Jesus Christ. Come on. There won't be a damn thing left to eat. They went out the door. The sunshine lay in a thin line under the window. From a distance, there could be heard a rattle of dishes. After a moment, the ancient dog walked lamely in through the open door. He gazed about with mild, half-blind eyes. He sniffed, and then lay down and put his head between his paws. Curly popped into the doorway again and stood looking into the room. The dog raised his head, and when Curly jerked out, the grizzled head sank to the floor again. So I think Steinbeck ended this chapter deliberately with a description of this old, miserable dog who can't even bother to get up because it's so old and miserable and in pain. It's to remind us of a couple of things. One, everything ends up getting old. You'll get old. I'm old, right? We're all going to get old, just like this dog. It's how we go out that is the important question that is brought up here, right? This idea of life. And when does life not become worth it? Is it worth it for those puppies to continue living knowing that they're going to starve to death eventually? Is it worth it for Candy's dog to continue living? Sure, sure, it has a right to live. Everything has a right to live. But is it worth living when life is so miserable? So these are important questions that are going to come up again. So that's it for Chapter 2. Next class, we'll have a little writing assignment about Chapter 2. Once again, please let me know if you have any questions. Email me. Get in touch with me. It doesn't even have to be about English class. It can be about anything. If you need help with anything at all, just let me know. For those of you who are A-Day, have a great spring break. Not that it's going to be much different than the last couple of weeks have been. Those of you who are B-Day, welcome back from your spring break. I hope it was super relaxing not having come to school for a week. Stay safe out there, guys. Stay healthy. Stay home. Stay classy. See ya.